carefully at the tree implementation in the Ethereum clients, and then compared that against a more naive namespace approach. And so we're just beginning with a more naive namespace approach to get started, and then see if we have more efficient implementations later. But that's largely my update. We also have I went ahead and did the BNFC implementation of our bytecode format. So I'll probably be checking that in today. So the advantage of encoding that in BNFC is that it gives us serialization. We automatically get serialization and in-memory representations for virtually all the major language bindings. Java, C, C++, Haskell, OCaml. There's also an XML representation, and JSON representations. So with one fell swoop, we get all of the major language bindings for the serialization. So that's I have that compiling through BNFC now, and we'll check that in a little bit later today. That's my update. Anybody else? This could be a short and sweet meeting. Vitalik, and it looks like you and Virgil are kicking ass on the sharding stuff. You're muted if you're talking.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I'm trying really hard to make a kind of minimal chain-based Casper spec that has all the desired properties, but is as simple as possible.
Yeah, understood.
So let's see. Right now, what I have is basically the longest chain algorithm combined with this mechanism for kind of try and maybe succeed consensus with the checkpoints. And yeah, so the idea basically here is that there would be some checkpoint period of, let's say, or some epoch length, and at the start of every epoch, this might be every hour or whatever, you would have a checkpoint, and the checkpoints then basically blocks after the checkpoint would try to first kind of pre-vote on one of the blocks at the checkpoint height. And once enough pre-voted, the idea is that you would try to commit, and clients would be able to see how many pre-votes there are, how many commits there are, and then calculate basically how many blocks it would take in order to, or how much equivocation would be required in order to break the finalization. And that would be the kind of economic finality number that they would kind of push out.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, so the goal here basically is that you have to try to come up with something that feels like a natural extension of the longest chain rule, and where the finalization part of the mechanism doesn't end up kind of conflicting with or having a tension with the longest chain part in some weird way.
Yeah, so, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, so one example of this is that if you imagine there's some medium range fork, and you imagine on one side of a fork there's, let's say, 30% of the validators, but on the other side there's 20% of the validators, but then the second fork is twice as long as the first fork because, well, it just so happens that all of those 20% managed to make a block multiple times. Then you have chain A looking longer from one metric and chain B looking longer by another metric, and then there's weirdness when you have to try and decide which one to choose, which one to build blocks off of, which one to vote on. So that's what I'm trying to kind of get rid of right now.
Right. So what do you do in terms of? I mean, do you force a single metric, or what's your? Yeah.
So there's a couple approaches. One of them is to force a single metric, so to try and go away from pure longest chain.
Uh-huh.
So the idea here is that it's actually actually fairly similar to what I did back in when I was doing like punishing incorrectness instead of punishing equivocation, where you would have basically it's like a ghost style rule where you have one checkpoint, and then in order to choose which child you're on, you would kind of figure out how much value at loss is behind each of the child checkpoints. So then you would take the biggest one, and then you would go from there. And if you have to, you would fall back to the longest chain rule. So I'm trying to come up with something similar.
I see. Okay. All right. I understand the direction. Does that mean that evaluation according to something that isn't in alignment with the metric is punishable?
So, I mean, it depends what you. So, if you, as a validator, try to make blocks on top or try to like support a chain that isn't the biggest one in the metric, then like that action by itself doesn't get you like completely slashed, because like it theoretically could have happened if you just like didn't receive all of the blocks.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
At the same time, it does mean that you're likely to not get a block that gets it to the main chain, and so you're not going to get a block reward, and you're likely to get some tiny dunkel penalty.
I see. Okay. All right. Interesting. Cool. That's very interesting. And this is you're still doing this work in Python?
Well, I'm doing the work theoretically, but like Python's the most natural client to try to actually implement this on.
Oh, okay. All right. So
I already got a Casper contract that's already got quite a bit of logic in it.
Okay.
Like the thing I really care about is also there's a couple of opcodes, like also the whole mechanism around running validation code that's fairly important.
Yeah. Understood. Cool. Any other interesting updates?
I had a question. Is there a good reference to Casper in writing up the RChain architecture? I want to point to the Ethereum Casper. I recently read the Vlad's History of Casper blog series, which is great.
Well, there's a Mauve paper.
So there's the Mauve paper, but it's a bit
okay, but that's
a bit outdated now though, because like that's still going with the punishing incorrectness model.
Yeah. So I'd like to chime in here because I feel like my obsessiveness gives me some insight here. I think that, and my willingness to argue with strangers on the internet, I think that like I'm actually replying to one of Charles Hotchinson's sock puppets on Reddit right now, and I think that we kind of have this weird problem where the Casper team, as like an actual diverse group of like really intelligent experts in a number of fields, like have no interest at all. No offense, Vitalik, but no interest in really communicating to the body public like what's going on, to a point where like people like even the word Casper, like when we talk about Casper, like we're in a Casper stand-up talking about not only the consensus algorithm but the sharding,
they fit together. Unfortunately,
right. And but even having that discussion when you're talking with people and you're like, oh well, like Oberos, this thing that Chris is making, he's like, oh, it's so much, or Charles is making, he's like, oh, it's so much better than Casper. I'm like, it doesn't even do like half of what Casper sets out to do. Like, it's not even an apples to apples comparison. Like, yeah, like Casper is extremely ambitious. So yeah, that's a fair critique. But like, then to say that your thing that does less than a third of what Casper does is somehow better. It's like, well, like you're talking about a tire, we're talking about a truck. Like, yeah, you have an awesome tire. We're still engineering our truck. Like, I'm not quite sure like how to even argue that point if you don't get that we're making a truck and you're talking about a tire. Now but that issue that like how do we communicate what we're actually doing, I think is really it's a big challenge because it's a community of people who are, I mean, to me, the origin of the blockchain community is internet marketers. And so you have an internet marketing mentality around everything all the time. And so when you're actually trying to do science, you can't even really talk about it. You can't even talk about like research, because their understanding of research is like SEO marketing on Google or something. Like it's like this totally bizarre model. And so I'm sort of on a bit of a tangent here, but this does tie into like what documentation is there of Casper? Well, it's like these videos are the documentation. Like this is the documentation of Casper. Like me being recorded in this video right now is the best documentation available for the work that we're doing with Casper.
Yeah, it's live research.
I mean, I think one of the practical challenges is that the spec has been changing, and I did try to write a like documents describing it several times, but it's ended up changing it to something else. And like, I personally would be happy to write a document describing a protocol, but only like at a time when it's relatively when it's like set enough in stone that it's worth it.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with that. And I think that it's very difficult for people who don't do research and haven't been doing research and don't have a research background to understand like how much work has been done and how close we are to being finished and how far away we are from a formal spec, right? Like I think people get the relationship of those things very confused, that like the final spec is like pretty close to the end of the process, not the beginning.
Well, it's not the end. I'd call it the middle, actually, because like even after the final spec, you still have you still have testing, you still have implementation, you still have that whole pipeline for a theory that took a year, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So for me, well, I would say, okay, so this is the difference I would make. I would say that because the actual concept of Casper is so novel, we had to do a lot more basic research before we can even get to the spec.
Agreed.
So then we've done all that basic research that I don't think, I mean, the reality is that when you talk, like when I talk to the people at MIT, like Neha and all those people, like they're like, wow, that's an enormous amount of crazy basic research. You guys are nuts. Good luck. Like they're not confused about how much basic research is involved. Like people who do basic research in distributed systems or in consensus algorithms or in, languages, any of the things that we're touching on, they appreciate that this is like a huge amount of work. So I think that there's like amongst experts an understanding of how much work there is to do, but it's hard just to communicate. And like people in the community, like when I'm talking to just normal people, they don't seem to understand how important testing is. And I'm a big proponent of formal verification, but I also put systems in production. And I know that formal verification isn't going to help me when my machine runs out of memory under load, right? Like,
amen.
And so like just going through that whole process and trying to explain that to people who haven't experienced it is very difficult. And so I don't, on one hand, if I thought that providing a spec would like somehow stop trolls, I'd be like, oh yeah, let's work on a spec. But like, I think really just going through the research process properly and testing things before we even publish a spec and doing all of that stuff the right way, I think is the right process. I just don't know. Like, I think our process, the only problem I have with our process is that we can't explain it to people. And that's like kind of a big problem. But that's really my only like concrete problem. Otherwise, I think the pace and the broadness and the inclusion, like this is an incredibly inclusive process, which is another thing that's very frustrating to me. It's like people are talking like it's not inclusive, and it's like this is one of the most inclusive like communities I've ever seen. So I don't understand that critique at all. But yeah, I'm open. I really would like to resolve this sort of weird, like I think there's a real legitimate, I think people in the public have a legitimate claim to saying we don't understand what's going on, But in my mind, my private response is you don't understand what's going on because you don't have enough of a background to read all the open stuff that's available for you to understand. You know, it's not like when Matthew Wampler Doty is making a criticism, right? He's making a very deep, nuanced critique. Most of the critiques you see in public are like, you don't have any documentation. And I'm like, frankly, Greg has so many documents, I can't figure out which one to show somebody. So, you know, I don't know how we bridge that gap as a community. Like, I don't know how we and get people to chill out and just say, like, guys, like, it's happening.
One thing that we might consider is some kind of like logically centralized place where people that at least like gives pointers to like all of the places where discussion is happening and where stuff is being written, so that like at least some place where we can show people like this is where the stuff is that's happening in Casper research, rather than everything just being all over the place and like difficult for people who even wants to figure things out to do it.
Right.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to find the MOF paper, and I found a broken link. You know, so I don't even know.
Yes.
I've got draft 3, and I don't know if that's the latest one. I couldn't find it, so it's probably in Reddit somewhere. I'm sure. Where?
Yeah, I don't want to fix that particular issue until I actually write up a new version of the MOF paper with the newer protocol. But I mean, points totally taken. Like, I think there definitely are documents that we've all written, and they have been fairly scattered. And if we can make them less scattered, I guess that would help.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't want it to sound like it's this broad or this long in scope, but when you think about it, right, from special relativity to general relativity was a greater than 10-year process, and Einstein would basically publish a spec and then retract it, and publish a spec and then retract it, and that's kind of, you know, it's not like we're retracting specs so much as discovering through the testing process that, you know, this, you know, there's an issue with the way we've conceptualized it, and we're not happy. We think we can do better, and so that's the kind of the way I think about this particular process. And I first of all, a year ago, or maybe a little more than a year ago, I was really nervous that there wasn't a Casper, that there was no there. But now I'm actually very, very confident that we have not just a protocol, but a family of protocols, and what we're now isolating it.
Yeah,
the particular elements of that family of protocols that's gonna meet the market needs best. So that's and so I agree that,
right. Like the thing.
Go ahead.
So like the thing I think we fine. Sorry, I was just saying the thing that I think we didn't have going into Singapore, and I feel like we really have now, is like even actual agreement across the team on like both what the basic principles are and on like different ways of expressing the principles, and even kind of building blocks of protocols that we're pretty much all using and we're committed to using. Right, like it's not at total protocol agreement, but like it's quite close to that. I know, like a family of protocols is definitely a good word.
Yeah, exactly. And the family of protocol, I mean, one of the things that I think about is like the appropriate factorization or modularization, so that you can see how all of the different elements of the family are related. So that, you know, if you parameterize it, you know, this way, then you get this protocol. If you parameterize or you actualize the parameters in this way, you get this other protocol. And I think that's that's what I've been trying to focus mostly, is getting the building blocks pieced together in the right way. Cool. So Ed, long story short, no, there isn't a good
okay.
Casper reference reference. It's on the map to have a good Casper reference.
No, that's good to know. Then I won't I won't knock myself out looking for it and from the RChain architecture document try to find the perfect reference because it doesn't exist yet. That's good.
Yeah, what you can do is you can point people to the YouTube channel with the Casper stand-up videos, and say
yeah. I mean, but for unless someone's really deep, it's not that helpful because it's
fair enough.
Takes quite a bit of time to.
Well, I've given a thumbnail sketch in the mobile processes for programming the blockchain.
So we reference that, right?
Yeah, cool.
So what domain name should I make? So Vitalik, I like to strike while the iron's hot. So I'm thinking I should just register the domain name now and start putting up a site where we actually can, collaboratively.
Oh, a domain name, like an actual website for Casper stuff?
Yeah.
So Casper is probably already taken.
Hold on. There's usually like weird domains. Let me check.
Well, one of my
the problem is that we're competing with a stupid bed company.
Yes.
We could call it Friendly Ghost, or I don't know.
Hold on. Casper.today, $17.
You did that so much faster than I did.
Casper.man, $1.
One of my concerns is if you ask Vlad, Vitalik, Greg, Rick to describe Casper, you'll get different answers. One Greg's would clearly have an RChain spin on it, and that's also part of the confusion. And so this is not a question so much about the details, but of the context.
Yeah, agrees that it's a public, economic, censorship-resistant consensus protocol.
Yeah, and
I don't think anyone disagrees with that description.
Yeah, but I also like to clarify, depending on whom I'm talking to, that we sometimes talk about things that are not strictly the consensus protocol and easily call them Casper.
That's correct. Yes. Yeah. Because because in order to make the protocol practical, there are things that you need, right? Like if it's going to scale, it's got to be able to compose in certain ways. So, sharding becomes a central discussion because it will impact the choices that you make about the data structures that are the bedrock of the way you express your protocol.
Right, but if there's an assumption to say we want to describe Casper on top of either the existing EVM or the EVM with another opcode or something like that, that's one set of explanations versus a different VM.
Right, but that's wedded to a realization. Like it should be possible to write down a public economic consensus protocol that's completely it's a spec and it's completely independent of any particular technology stack. Right. I mean that's very, very standard in the distributed literature, right?
So if you describe the requirements and the specifications for Casper, that you're saying that could be done in a platform neutral way. Right?
That's correct. That's exactly right. And it's like the FLP paper is technology neutral, right? It's a result that's going to hold over any technological realization of consensus protocols. So that's the level at which Casper ultimately needs to be expressed, but we're just not there yet, right? And the fact is that we also need to be able to realize it on existing technological platforms because it has a significant practical application. Cool.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
So good conversation. Very good conversation. Thanks for bringing up that question. That generated a lot of good discussion. I'm more than happy to donate 30 minutes back to all of us if we are done.
Yeah, as am I. So I think I'm gonna buy this Casper.today domain, and then we can sort of figure out how we want to host it. Maybe just like a WordPress or something very simple.
Yeah, sure.
Don't want to do anything too crazy.
RChain is more than happy to, donate the AWS server that it runs on.
Yeah. So yeah, we can discuss that offline more in depth. But yeah, I'm buying the domain now.
Sweet. All right. Let's rock on. See you guys next week.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Ciao.
Okay. See you.